Episode 5, Nikki and John Pranks versus 30 Rock. Why YouTube seems more credible to the younger generation. This episode is dedicated to Julie Cantwell, Paul Robinson, and Michael Espadilla. The question I explore in this episode is, why do people treat YouTube as a more credible source of information compared to mainstream media? This question evolved from an unrelated, well, at first blush, dialogue with a colleague from my previous profession. Julie Cantwell, among others, helped me a lot through one of my darkest professional times. Julie, if you're watching, you know what I'm talking about. One day, she remarked about how her children had no idea what it meant to wait for their favorite TV show to be broadcast. The reason? Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, and YouTube, etc., which actually means and others in Italian. She further noted how the younger generation lacks the patience because technology makes instant access, at least information, a common standard for the younger generation. This got me thinking about information sources the younger generation often cite to build their arguments. When I used to deal with college-aged students, I often heard Wikipedia, YouTube, and other internet-based information sources. It was hardly anything from printed newspapers, nor from major network TV broadcast news. Many of them cited, "I feel this is wrong," as the sole basis of argument, which Ben Shapiro, whether you agree or disagree with his conclusions, often debunks with his "facts don't care about your feelings" philosophy. College students often have access to printed information sources, translation, libraries with printed newspapers that are quite impressive. Yet in the past, I hardly met anyone, the ratio is about 1 to 500, who actually sought information from available libraries. Even if access is free, while paid for by other means, why would these students rely on internet-based information sources instead? Per New York Public Library's fiscal year 2019 report, its operating budget was $325,440,000 for serving its about 17 million patrons. By the way, that works out to be about $19.14 of information benefits for New Yorkers per year, should they choose to take advantage of it. All right, it's defined the terminology time. Media is defined as main means of mass communications, which includes broadcasting, publishing, and the internet, regarded collectively per the Oxford English Dictionary. Mainstream is also defined by Oxford English Dictionary as the ideas, attitudes, or activities that are shared by most people and regarded as normal or conventional by the masses, which means mainstream media is defined as mass communications means broadly, which is basically broadly accepted by a wide swath of people. It also makes the term subjectively quantifiable, vulnerable to changing attitudes, vulnerable to change by changes of attitudes of people. Since, as far as Patrick Hamilton is concerned, per his gaslight play, people are susceptible to, that's right, you guessed it, gaslighting. What is considered to be mainstream media is also susceptible to change as well. Broadcast media, mainstream media I should say, involves voice and data transmission over radio airwaves, received either through a radio receiver or television in general. This would require not just the technology, for example, electrical anything such as circuits and power, but also the broadcast content or intellectual property such as copyright protected anything. It's very much a one-way communication deal, since most people lack the equipment to respond via same radio frequency spectrum, and at least in the United States, the Federal Communication Corporation has strict penalties for doing so without permission. Looking at radio means of mass communication, the broadcasting entity, network, station, et al. Needed resources, either by government subsidies or advertising revenues, to build, staff, and create content for the radio, station, channel, network at hand. Rather than boring you with the details I tend to chew on, go look up an NBC sitcom called News Radio. This 1995 to 1999 sitcom, as humorous the scripts, if there was a strict adherence of script at all, were, examined what it took to operate a radio station and keep attracting new listeners. Phil Hartman, God rest his soul, he was outstanding in the Jingle All the Way movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Television means of mass communication owes a lot to radio, as annotated by the Buggles 1978 Video Killed the Radio Star song, and the music video too. One interesting note: Virginia Hay, an Australian actress famous as Paul Zotazan in Farscape sci-fi TV show. I think it featured the Canadian actor Ben Browder. That's it. And Claudia Black. That's right. Trivia. What can I say? By the way, Virginia Hay, she was a woman in the acrylic tube. Go look it up. Advertising revenue is clearly much higher, especially after examining NFL, National Football League, Super Bowl commercial broadcast fees. Think about it. $5.6 million for a 30-second spot during Super Bowl 54 halftime. Yes, it's a lot of money. But in all fairness, there is not a radio analog to this example. Imagine if Weird Al Yankovic's 1989 movie called UHF TV station had this budget. George could have hired over 20 Stanley Spadowskis, and easily have had many variations of Wheel of Fish. Go look it up. It's a very campy movie. Radio and television networks, when creating broadcast content, essentially have to guess what the listeners/viewers would give up some other activity to listen to/watch. This is a tough challenge for anyone if you think about it. How can a small enclave of executives figure out what a fraction of a nation would sacrifice, time-wise, to watch what is on the airwaves? It turns out it's a complex system of surveys, preview audience reactions, Nielsen ratings, and advertising revenue variations. Looking at nonfiction, these traditional networks have either documentaries, reality, and news shows to convey some type of information to the supposed audience, since a one-way broadcast station can never fully tell how many people are actually tuning in at any given time. They essentially have proximate evidence, which takes time to aggregate to determine what media content is reaching above audience, critical mass, or not. This helps to explain why some shows become cult classics, because the mass media companies misinterpreted the proximate audience, such as Firefly. The media companies doing their thing also takes their time too. New media content may be produced for a fraction of a season before it gets cancelled. The cost of producing new media content, at least from an intellectual property point of view, usually exceeds the average person's yearly salary. Let's say 6 months for argument's sake. This means media companies often have to invest more than the person's average salary to produce information content that an audience may not pay enough attention to. Seems like a gamble, just like how Hollywood movies are produced. Now let's look at YouTube. Here's a website/company that got started by a few former PayPal employees, I think it was 2 or 3, who tried to solve the how do I upload videos easily and have it be accessible from anywhere technical challenge. It clearly grew as far as external investments go, just like social media platforms/companies, into a worldwide ubiquitous video upload and viewing resource that during COVID-19 induced lockdowns, yes, I kid you not, the European Union essentially asked YouTube to tone down the high definition streaming rates in order to not overwhelm their internet infrastructure. YouTube's business model is similar to traditional media companies with some major twists. It relies on people's created content as a basis for viewing traffic, which is effectively using crowdsourcing to organize intellectual property that the people own or borrow to a point from others. It provides a data storage capability by relying on advertisement revenue to pay for the storage infrastructure, distributed wherever YouTube, and to a certain extent, some governments, decide/allow such things to be built and operated. The internet communication infrastructure is subsidized by a combination of governments and internet service subscribers, which means unlike radio and TV broadcast companies, YouTube's operating costs are for data storage and access availability. Unlike one-way transmission, due to the comments feature, which can be helpful or not depending on how much trolling a YouTube channel attracts. After a content creator uploads a video, viewers' comments can start rolling in. On the surface, this may seem innocuous. However, it can lead to further bright ideas for future videos. Nikki and John's pranks are videos on YouTube and some other platform which I'm too lazy to look up, where the couple play pranks on each other. Assuming the viewers' comments exceed 1,000 per day, with some data reduction / filtration tools, this couple, apparently they're no longer a couple, but that's another topic for somebody else to investigate later on, not only provide the crowdsourced information content to YouTube, but this couple end up collecting ideas for future episodes via, you guessed it, the crowdsourcing method. It's definitely less than 6 months before the feedback loop is completed for one cycle. By the way, I highly recommend the Ghost Chili, actually in Hindi I think it's called Bhut Jolokia, and the Electric Bug Zapper episodes, for context sake. And warning, these videos are lucky to qualify for anything below PG-13. Looking at nonfiction content, people create videos that explain how to build guitars. Yes, I've tried a few, much to my chagrin. Ow, ow, ow. Convert a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter into a Class B motorhome / recreational vehicle, complete with shower, toilet, and a kitchen. And also to bake sourdough bread. I often search for instructional videos on just about how to fix anything around the house on YouTube. And more than half of the time, the videos are informative and they have captured my attention / time. I can also find some mass media company created content such as the Super Bowl halftime commercials. Think about the Office Linebacker with this, "You Killer Joe, you make some more" lines on YouTube. It's obvious these are intellectual property owned by somebody else, but these mass media companies have decided to upload some videos on YouTube for the sake of attracting some potential audiences to come over to the networks. It may seem silly to rely on a quasi-free information source for a variety of reasons and topics, but I've learned how to bake gluten-free sourdough bagels. Yeah, they're pretty good. At least my kids tell me they're pretty good. Also pronounce Estonian words, thanks to the squirrel girl. Tananbaga. Yes, thank you very much. Replace cabin air filters in my vehicles and restore a badly rusted Brompton folding bicycle. In German, they would be called Englische Klappreder. Klappreder, that's it. From soup to nuts or start to end. It's a brilliant business model. Think about it. It's analogous to the Apple Store, who helps its customers / fan base create the next version of iSomething. And all the Apple Store has to do is to make it available for viewing and sometimes purchase 24/7. Let's look into this a little bit. YouTube is a quick, on-demand kind of a thing and gives people access to information that may or may not be accurate, but it's something that mass media companies cannot offer due to its one-way transmission and feedback loop cycles. After a lot of research, I then realized something shocking. First, the major TV broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and arguably PBS, along with print and newspaper companies, clearly didn't have the college students' attention, therefore their viewership. According to Katerina Eva Matsa's January 5th, 2018 article on Pew Research Center's Fact Tank website, only 8% of people between 18 to 29 years of age, at least in the United States, get their news information from television, local, network, and cable. Second, the major media companies were competing with smaller entities whose market entry costs were nowhere near as high as before when publishing content via the internet. Third, with the advent of mobile devices, college-age students didn't have the need to sit in front of a one-way communication device, i.e. radio/TV, when either tweets or something similar, i.e. RSS feeds, supposedly deliver information in 30 seconds or less. When one considers major TV broadcast networks, they have remained relatively intact from a corporation point of view. But the details show something different. For example, Walt Disney was given a lot of money by ABC to start building Disneyland, which led to the point where Walt Disney and the company, for example, made enough money to eventually buy out ABC. How ironic. With the internet access becoming more available on a mass scale, with its use being relatively unregulated compared to radio waves thanks to the FCC. Companies such as YouTube effectively outsource content creation and shift content access costs to the subscriber/viewer. But let's also be fair about this too. YouTube didn't start out trying to compete with mass media companies. It started out with an attempt to fill a need. A combination of timing and Moore's law made it feasible, with lots of investors, for YouTube to not only connect content creators to potential audiences, but also made the feedback loop smaller and faster by eliminating the studio executives. Earlier, I remarked about how college students prefer to access information when it's convenient for them, even if the information source may be suspect. This is reminiscent of Damon Wayans, where unlike Jay Leno, who's funny all the time, or he's on all the time, Damon Wayans is basically Homie the Clown. He's funny when he wants to be, on his own terms. For further details, look up an old TV show called In Living Color, a comedy skit series produced by Keenan Ivory Wayans. Technology has basically enabled a good portion of college students to be like Homie the Clown when it comes to accessing information on their own terms. This has to drive traditional mainstream media crazy. It's basically Who Moved My Cheese? Or Job Shift. By the way, Job Shift is a more interesting book compared to Who Moved My Cheese. But it turns out they have also decided to post some of their contents on YouTube for sake of hopefully recovering lost audiences. Just look at how Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade was viewable on YouTube, courtesy of live streaming. In a way, YouTube has become an advertising vehicle for mainstream media companies too. Think about Super Bowl commercials. Even after the advertisers post their creations on mainstream media, eventually their creations end up on YouTube. Creations such as Office Linebacker, let's say Triple T, Terrible Terry Tate, What's Up, Man Laws, to name a few, basically live in perpetuity for the price of one high/cool halftime advertisement slot. It doesn't benefit the mainstream media companies. It benefits the product advertisers to perpetuity. YouTube contents are also subject to edits too, with the exception of Dude Perfect series. By the way, if you're wondering what Dude Perfect is, go look them up. By the way, those dudes clearly know their craft. It's normal to have content be presented in an editable form, or in an edited form, I should say. People who basically use the Viking iron extraction method usually film the whole process and fast forward the video so that they could truncate 24 hours or more into 30 minutes. Or people who try to analyze baseball pitches, or for the cricket fans out there, the cricket bowls. Their videos are basically slowed down a bit so that you could actually see what's happening. Getting back to the original question, it's true that YouTube is more credible than... is it? Is it true that YouTube is more credible than mainstream media? When one considers nonfiction content, because content creators can publish their contents cheaper, hopefully, and faster than going through studio executives, never mind their assistants, in general, it's easier to find eccentric content. But there are no guarantees that either sources are fully credible/fully accurate. Mainstream media companies have history against them on this topic mainly because they have been around longer than YouTube. But YouTube doesn't screen content to determine if the materials are legitimate or not, because that requires verification, which not only introduces values into the equation, but expands the feedback loop closer to what mainstream media companies have to live with. Because of the Homie the Clown analogy, where people access information when they want it to, on their terms, this puts YouTube at a clear advantage, since the search function is demand-driven, not schedule/plan-driven. Water flows through a path of least resistance, by the way, so do electrons. Since cable TV subscription is an additional recurring cost, and content people may be looking for may not be on cable TV channels at the requested time, demanded time, YouTube is easier for people to, therefore, by habit, default to. This question is best answered when you, as a listener, observed the people around you, since doing the actual research requires costly surveys, which is an exercise best reserved for rich entities thanks to advertising revenues, such as mainstream media companies. I encourage you to do this, since our society has become less connected with each other, as documented in Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book. It's a good book too. I highly recommend it. You may be surprised to find people's reasons for trusting either YouTube or mainstream media for information, especially for education's sake. Some rely on one/other because it is free, or it is not available in other sources. Others rely on the one or the other because of social pressures. Therefore, I have no specific conclusions regarding political news sources, since this is an ongoing debate between all sides of political spectrum. That debate is best reserved for entities such as Daily Wire, Fox News, and any of their favorite targets such as mainstream media. For information, Ben Shapiro pokes fun at media, but what he really means by media is mass communication media that broadcasts selective views. I have to give more credit to YouTube when it comes to interviews with politicians. From a time allotment point of view, most mainstream media news shows often make commentaries of short, 1 minute or less video clips or sound bites, which may be quite different when taken out of context. Joe Rogan, famous for his Joe Rogan Experience as his YouTube series, and now I think he's gone to Spotify. Sure. Became famous on YouTube, excuse me, for his for other reasons too, including, MMA, as well as stand-up comedy too. On his show, he basically has free running dialogue with anyone who's willing to sit in a studio. For a few hours, his dialogue with Bernie Sanders actually helped this US Senator provide good context for his arguments, whether you agree with him or not. Joe Rogan also had Ben Shapiro on the show too for a few hours. Ben Shapiro also often mocks Bernie Sanders on his Ben Shapiro show. When it comes to a method/means to gain new knowledge, YouTube definitely has the advantage because if content may be false, the viewers' comments and like/dislike vote metrics will yield some metric of competence, which is clearly missing on mainstream media broadcasts. It's analogous to a social media site known as Yik Yak. Users can back then when Yik Yak was a thing, they were able to downgrade someone's comments and from a values point of view if they disapproved of their comment. YouTube content creators' decision-making cycle is similar to the observe, orient, decide, and act loop. This is a decision-making model created by a retired U.S. Air Force officer, Colonel John Boyd. YouTube content creator cycle is much smaller and shorter than mainstream media because the connection with viewers is one common feedback mechanism provided by, you guessed it, YouTube. Hey, Mike Padilla, I did it! I included a U.S. Air Force leadership reference here. If Frank Zappa were alive today, he would be proud of YouTube, I would say. Because this is because of his, if you want an education, go to the library quote, where some library contents are available on YouTube. He would also be a fan of YouTube since anyone can upload content without any meddling from studio executives. Mainstream media does have its place for people who prefer to receive information without having the opportunity to ask questions directly to the content creators. Sports broadcasters are like this, where people prefer to watch and yell at some quotes such as "Boom shakalaka!" Soap operas are also a great resource for practicing conversational languages, irrespective of what language you're watching the soap operas in. So in the end, there is no clear winner here. The younger generation seems to prefer YouTube, but YouTube is much more responsive than mainstream media when it comes to new content creation. Information accuracy is not guaranteed, so please do make your own decision on this matter. And now for the Kevin Bacon game. In YouTube world, the viewer and creator are separated by YouTube. But in mainstream media, the viewer and creator are separated by broadcast stations, studio executives, production studios, and the FCC. Therefore, by a reduction of 3 degrees of separation, the viewers need to treat YouTube as their best friends forever, while mainstream medias are more like third cousins twice removed. Thanks again for tuning in. And as always, if you want to subscribe, great. But more importantly, if this encourages you to think for yourself, then wonderful. So If you have any more requests for different topics you want me to chew on, post them away on the comments. Thanks again. Until next time.